Welcome back, everybody, to the My Generation podcast. On today's episode of the show, we are talking languages. We're talking with film and drama student Abbi Anderson-Jones about her love for languages and a particular skill that she is developing right now, which is learning the Welsh language, which is not a language I'd say is a dying language, but it is a lesser spoken language. So very interesting. We'll be talking about all of that today, why she's learning the language, and so much more. We've also got, as you know, every single week here on the My Generation podcast, our 5 weekly features of Sammy Bacon's album reviews, Harry Monday's film reviews. We have got Emma Cusson's poetry readings, Tom Axtell's pirate profiles, and Joe Finnegan's video game reviews, all coming throughout this week's episode of the show. Plenty of great features to get your teeth into whilst we're talking with Abbi. Now, we've got a bit of a different sound this week. We've got a slightly different setup for the podcast. We're crossing everything to make sure we're actually live everywhere and working because we have no idea if it'll work. But let me know if you like the sound of this podcast in the comments below, as opposed to some of the recent weeks. We're trying to optimize and tune the podcast sound every week to get the best sound. But without further ado, let's welcome our guest. Welcome to the show, Abbi.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, I've been wanting to do this for ages.
Yeah, me and Abbi have been in talks about speaking about the Welsh language for a long time because my mum's Welsh. She doesn't speak Welsh, but it's always been fascinating to me, people that do speak it, and with it being a lesser spoken language, even within its own nation. There's only about I think it was the annual, the Office for National Statistics, they said in March, only like 28% ish people in Wales over the age of 3 speak Welsh, which is
Yeah.
kind of crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to learn, because not a few years, like it's not that long ago, but a few years ago, UNESCO, the people in charge of the populations of languages and stuff, actually almost, it's like not completely declared like severely going extinct, but it's still, they did like a poll, and I think it was about 3 years ago, they found out that only 310,000 people spoke it fluently, and that was like not even the whole population of Wales. It's only a tiny bit of actually Wales actually speak it, and I was just really interested in like the history behind the languages of like Britain and stuff, and I was like, I've done loads of research on that, so the fact that like not even like the whole population speaks it really intrigued me.
Yeah, and it seems to be, you get sort of different areas. So where, my mum was from, in and around that area of Swansea, it's traditionally a very English-speaking kind of area. But then sort of the further north we went, you can almost find little pockets of spaces that are almost exclusively Welsh-speaking. It's fascinating because in England, where we're based, you have that sort of same thing with accents, really, don't you? Where, you go
Yeah.
from one city to the next and it's a different culture, different accents, different everything. But with Welsh, it's the nature of the language they speak.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that your mum obviously grew up there. My dad grew up in Broadhaven and around there, so southern Wales, and he had there's like a rule that they have in Wales that at least everyone is taught a little bit of Welsh. Obviously, not everyone is fluent, but they are taught it or they do their exams in it. And so, where my granddad was in the Air Force, my dad moved around quite a lot, and he ended up at the time he was fluent in German because he'd grown up in Germany, and then moved to Wales, and then had to learn Welsh as well to do his exams. And it's always like been really like intriguing to me because he's grown up. I've grown up with him teaching me a few words and just telling me about his time in Wales, and it was lovely. And yeah, not that long ago I went to North Wales, and they speak Welsh as like obviously their first language up there. So round near Snowdonia National Park where I was, there was a lot of little farms and stuff, and the farmers only like exclusively spoke Welsh, and even the shops you go in, or the road signs and that, it was really interesting.
Yeah, it certainly is fascinating because the more north you go, the more Welsh speaking as a first language it seems, and it makes a lot of sense. But the English language is so popular that it seems to be the language everyone wants to know. But now, as English people, we sort of have a almost like a duty and a desire to go out and discover other languages that maybe aren't getting that love and connection. So, what is it? Would you say specifically about the Welsh accent then? The not accent, the Welsh language that drew you in?
Well, obviously, I've wanted to learn a language for a while, and at secondary school, I learned a bit of Spanish and that, but never really picked it up. And I figured I don't think like I would use that as much because I don't really plan on going to Spain that much. But like Wales, as it's so close, that really appealed to me. And as I was googling like more languages and researching languages around Britain and stuff, I found out about like all the Celtic languages, and I've heard that they were like going extinct or they were endangered languages anyway. And researching further into it, there's two types of like Gaelic languages, and there was like Brythonic and Goidelic. And Goidelic is like Irish Gaelic, Scottish Gaelic, Manx and stuff like that. And then Brythonic was Cornish, Welsh, and Breton, I think, obviously, like in France and stuff. And the history of it was that when after the Romans left and the Saxons came to England, they killed off a lot of the Celts and killed off their languages. And so the reason why the Gaelic languages are spoken in like the top end of Scotland and Wales and stuff is because that's where the people fled. There was two other Gaelic languages that were spoken in England at the time, and it was I think it was Cumbric and Pictish, but they were completely wiped out. They're extinct languages now. So people who fled, that's why there's some Celtic languages in France, because they've gone to Breton in France and Scotland and Wales and Ireland. And that's obviously why it's spoken a lot more in the northern parts of Wales as well, because it's where people ran away from. And also around near like the Tudor era, speaking Welsh in Wales was actually made illegal for a bit, as Henry VIII wanted English to be like the main language. So researching the history and stuff, it made me feel more like, oh, like these people who are like keeping this language going are so inspiring, because even through like being taken over and like their ancestors and their heritage like dying away, they've still kept this language going. And Wales is obviously closer to us, and I found it really appealing. And I found out that my granddad actually has a lot of Welsh ancestors and stuff, so I wanted to research more into his family tree and like where they came from. So I found it quite interesting. I just wanted to find out what my ancestors did as well.
Yeah, and it's also interesting, isn't it, to see how languages travel. So up until my my research for this video, I did not know that there was pockets of the United States that had Welsh speaking, but also an interesting one was a province in Argentina, a Welsh colony there, which only has like a small pocket of people. But the idea that a language like Welsh, or it can travel so far, and even with a decreasing number of people, that it can go the world over. There's people in Canada that speak it too, and I think that is genuinely really impressive and shocking to me, because it was a language that's dying off, but yet it is being brought back, isn't it?
Yeah, and like you said, there's like pockets of Welsh everywhere. There's actually a colony in, I don't know whereabouts in Canada, but it's a very small colony in Canada who exclusively speak Scottish Gaelic, which I found was so cool because it's travelled loads. And in the history of it, apparently a lot of Europe spoke Celtic languages or forms of Celtic languages, and then as different countries were taken over and different like the empires began and stuff, they all moved and migrated to islands surrounding the like mainland Europe. So that's why we have insular Celtic languages in Britain and like Canada and America.
It's so fascinating. And do you know, Abby, we haven't even reached the point where we're talking about the process of learning a language, and we've already sort of
Yeah.
covered so much. So what we're going to do now, we're going to go to two of our weekly features. We're going to go to Sammy Bacon and Harry Monday in today's show and go through what they recommend here on the My Generation podcast. As you know, every single week they've been doing it since March of this year. It's great to feature them on the show. And then the next bit that we're going to discuss with Abby, it's going to be what it's like actually learning the language, because now we've got the sort of historic side of it under our grasp. What the Welsh language means, where it traveled to, and all that great stuff. We're now going to move into, right, we've got the history, now let's start sitting down and learning this language. So we're going to go to that next. But firstly, Sammy Bacon, every week on the My Generation podcast. He is our music connoisseur from London, bringing us a new album for you to listen to every single week. And here is the album that Sammy would recommend this week.
Hey now, how you doing? Hope you're doing well. Today, I'm recommending you Marquee Moon by Television. Television are a punk band from the 70s, and they were part of this movement. They were part of the punk movement in New York, and they played at CBGB's in their early career, much like along with the Talking Heads. Not Talking Heads, not the Talking Heads. Blondie, the Ramones, all the punk bands like that. And Marquee Moon has become one of the most influential punk albums of all time. The guitars bounce and interweave beautifully. The center of the album is the title track, Marquee Moon, and it's a 10-minute epic featuring a 3-minute long Tom Verlaine solo. It's just glorious. Other great tracks are See No Evil, Venus, and Friction. And Television have this wonderful ability to be catchy and innovative, and this album just has influenced so much stuff. If you're a fan, if you really appreciate great technical guitar playing and sort of intricate song structures, I think Television as a band, they're a great band to check out. And Marquee Moon is just such a fun album. It's not very long, so it's not like a big committed listen, and it is one of the most influential albums of all time, and I couldn't recommend it higher. Yeah, if you like your punk, if you like your post-punk, if you like your catchy grooves, Television are the band to you, for you, to you. They could be to you. Listen to Marquee Moon. It's really good. Listen to more Television. Bye. Go on, Max. Finish it.
Thank you for that, Sammy. And we'll tune in with Sammy next week to find out what his next album review is. Let us know in the comments whether you're listening on YouTube, SoundCloud, or Spotify if there is a song, the album that Sammy should be reviewing here on the show. We're going to go back to Abby in just a moment to continue our discussion with the Welsh language and languages in general, really. But next we've got Harry Monday. He brings us a film review every single week here to the My Generation podcast. And here is the film that Harry would love to recommend for you all this week.
Dear old Harry here again, back with this week's film recommendation. This one is the movie that kick-started the whole superhero genre. I'm not on about your Spider-Man, your X-Men, or your Blade. I'm talking about The Rocketeer. For those of you who don't know your history of superhero movies, originally it started out with your Superman trilogy, or Superman quadrilogy, and your Batman quadrilogy. They were all nice and dandy, but that became what superhero movies were the standard for then. And it just showed other films like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think even the Zorro movies came out. I think Marvel's really old Captain America and Iron Man movies back then all followed the same sort of style as Superman and Batman, until this one movie shone out as an indie piece, which is The Rocketeer. The most simple superhero in the most simple of situations. Just a man finds a military-grade jetpack, puts on a helmet, and fights the Nazis. What more classic superhero life could you want? The whole love aspect from classic films is thrown in there also. Boy fights the bad guy, boy gets the girl. It's a happy day. For anyone who hasn't seen this, I would strongly recommend watching this straight away.
Thank you for that, Harry. And we'll tune in with Harry once again next week to find out what his next film review is. Don't forget to stay tuned later on in the show where we have poetry we have video games, and we have pirate facts, all three relatively new features to the show. They've only been going for about 8 to 12 weeks now, so not many episodes released yet, but we are very excited to keep bringing the three newest features to the My Generation podcast, more and more of them. So let us know what you think of those features when we get to that point in the show. But we're going back to Abbi now. We're talking about what it's like actually learning the language. So Abbi, you're really just on the beginning of your journey, aren't you? So when you were sitting down to think about, now I actually want to start taking in this language, where did you start?
Well, I when I was actually discussing learning this language with a mentor I have that helps me with my uni studies, and we were kind of thinking of like a way to help me organize actually like my studies and stuff, and we thought that if I could keep up during lockdown some lessons or just do a little bit of something every day, then that would help me get more into a routine when I went to uni. And I'd been discussing that I'd always wanted to learn a language, and then we sat down and did the research. And yeah, so I started off speaking to my dad first of all, because my dad grew up in Wales, and even though he's lost a lot of his fluency, he's still got a little bit of basic stuff. So he taught me about like the structures of the sentences and just a few like beginning words. And it's hard for me to sit down and actually learn something if someone's just speaking at me. So I bought notebooks and tried to find a bit more like on hands, like hands-on like way of learning, because otherwise it just wouldn't go in. So researching like YouTube tutorials. There's some really good YouTube tutorials out there that just help me get the basics, and even apps like Duolingo. I know that you can probably never become fluent by just using Duolingo. I found it actually quite helpful because it's someone speaking the words to me, so the more you replay that, the more it was in my head, and then I could write that down and get going that way.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it, because the memory side of it and creating those connections is arguably one of the toughest parts of learning languages. I grew up learning quite a lot of French, and if I had a key to remember something by, then it would go in a lot more. And if I put a beat to it, I remember for my my final French exam at school, interestingly, what happened is one of my friends in class jokingly decided to sing out his speaking piece. So we all had to do a speaking piece from memory, and he sang his to the class whilst we were all just revising, just to annoy everyone probably. And then I went home at school at the end of the day. I went to remember my one, and the only thing I could think about was his, because he had ingrained it into my head through singing it. And
yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Like if singing things are supposed to help loads.
Yeah, and it did. So I immediately turned mine into a song. I can't remember which song I actually chose to mirror it, and then I smashed the speaking exam that way. It went so well as a result of that. But so how have you found? Because I know everyone's got different styles and different ways of learning. How did you found it easier by actually listening to just a person speaking it in normal conversation?
Yeah, so with the YouTube videos and the Duolingo, it's kind of not like they speak it at you, but it's like you have to translate it straight away. So they speak it, and then you can click on it, it tells you the translation, and then you start doing it by memory, a bit like they tell you, and then they start challenging you. And also, like, another way I started learning was if I was writing anything down, the words that I did know, like prynhawn is afternoon. So if I was ever writing anything, I needed to write good afternoon, I'd write good and then have prynhawn, because then even though it's not the right language and it was just my notes, me getting used to writing it in, like, even if it was amongst English, it's kind of ingraining that in you, that's the word in Welsh as well. And I know a lot of my friends who are international students but speak English, that's a way that they learn as well, and a way that it just really helped me. I did that in my, like you're saying with your French, when I was learning Spanish GCSE. I remember a time where I was doing that, and it was my history exam, but I accidentally wrote the Spanish word for however instead of however in English, just because that was a way that I managed to get that word stuck in my head.
And it's like you said, routine as well. So doing it consistently every day, just it changes everything. Have you spoken to? I know you've had your dad as a contact. Have you spoken to any other fluent Welsh speakers about your journey?
Well, I'm on like a few Facebook groups at the moment and just discussing it with them, and other people who are on the same journey as you is really helpful. And when I went to North Wales, just even if I was ordering a coffee or something, just trying to they're very lovely people as well, and they're very helpful. I remember we were climbing Mount Snowdon, and halfway through there was a cafe, and there was a woman there, and she would take your order, and if you spoke to her English, she would take it in English and then shout it back to the people in Welsh. So hearing her do that, I was like, oh, I'm trying to learn. And she actually helped me with a few words. And just actually going to the country as well really helped. Like looking at the road signs and stuff, it helps you learn a lot quicker, even though I'm literally only a beginner and I only know a few words.
And obviously you're in forums, like you said. So for anyone who's listening who maybe thought a language like Welsh is on a decline, are there other people like you on this journey? You're not alone, are you? There's more people trying to learn this language.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people on these forums as well either grew up in Wales and want to learn, and like they're very patriotic people, so they a lot of them are saying they want to learn it because that's their country. They want to learn the language of their country, but also like me, who wants to learn a language but also wants to help out. Like obviously just me isn't going to change the world, but the more people that speak this language, the less likely that it will be declared extinct. Like a few years ago it declared endangered, and there's been movements and stuff in Welsh schools to like bring it back. And it's so sad that the fact that there was 2 other Gaelic languages spoken in our country, Pictish and Cumbric, and they are completely extinct and no one can speak them now because of what happened and how no one carried on. And it would be so lovely to learn the history of us. And yeah, so loads of people are like learning, and it was really easy. There's so lovely forums on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and just social media, like where people want to preserve this language.
And why do you think then that having these sort of languages, these really nuanced, smaller languages, are so important to modern life? Because I couldn't agree more. I think it's great having people learning all these languages. It gives you so much history. But the argument could be made that, you know, by having people more speak, you know, a couple of languages could be easier for communication. So why do we still need, like we both agree, why do we need these languages to still exist?
Well, it's the history of our country and countries surrounding us. And I feel like obviously English is spoken worldwide, and it's supposed to be one of the hardest languages to learn, and that's because of the influence of many different countries. Obviously we were an empire at some point, and it is quite sad because English people have like gone to places and stuff. Like the history of these languages, that it was made illegal to speak these people's languages, but we've got so many influences from the Celtic language in our own language, and it's very similar to different languages surrounding us. So it helps you understand the language you're speaking, and also like carries on the heritage. And if people just stop speaking these languages, you might go, oh, it's not my country, like I don't need to learn that, but it's someone else's culture, and all these people came before us and they would have. It's just so interesting. Like you can't let a different culture die out.
And plus with the sort of influence of you know, different, I guess it's like you know, how we use what's the word, I've lost the word, what do you call them? They are, you know, like slang within languages.
Yeah.
Words that go through phases where they come into you know, our dialect, and then they leave, and different generations have their own slang. So it's very interesting from that level that those languages are important to me, because, you know, there are versions of English in multiple generations across different areas of the country. I speak different to how my parents speak, to how my
Yeah.
grandparents used to speak. And I bet you're probably in the same boat, you know, and that's just within our own language, which is crazy.
Yeah, and there's so much influence from different languages in English, with the sentence structures and stuff, and that's why it's classed as one of the hardest languages to learn, as because of all this different influence. And the more you learn a different language, you can see that in your own language. Obviously, there's quite a few Celtic words that we still use now, and there's like Celtic practices that we still use now, like, you know, the old wives' tales and stuff like that. A lot of that came from Celtic culture, and yeah, so it helps you. It helps out a different culture, helps out other people, but it also helps you get a deeper understanding of the language that you actually speak instead of taking it for granted.
Plus, it can be a really, really good conversation point. I had two really interesting moments happen somewhat recently. So I'm a bit of a video gamer. For those of you who know
Yeah.
me, I play the game Apex Legends a fair old bit, and sometimes I'm just queuing on my own. I don't have any teammates. I just want to, you know, play the game, and it's a game which encourages you to play with other players. So you'll get put on a team with someone, and it was very late at night. I wasn't talking too much, and on two separate instances, I was paired with French players, and because when it's late at night, you know, there's not many people playing, so it starts to pair you with people from wider and wider across the world. But I got paired with these two French guys. On two separate instances, and they were both trying to learn English. And so when they heard me speaking and, you know, giving call outs in the game and talking, you know, they were doing their best to try and, you know, make themselves articulatable to me, which I found just so inspiring. And we got talking through it, and I shared a little bit of the small amount of French that I'm good with, and it was just a really great conversation piece. And I remember those nights with fond memories, and I'm still connected with both of them, and I'm wishing them well on their journey with learning English. And you could tell when I was speaking to them that there was an immense sort of level of pride too that they had, because they were really grasping the language, and I could tell what they were saying, and it was really clear and really strong, and I really loved seeing that happen. So I imagine you probably have instances where you may have seen that too.
Yeah, I feel as our country, as England, I feel like we get a lot of like a bad name abroad because people assume that, well, other people speak English, so they should speak to me in English. Well, I feel like that is just very, you know, like, if you're going to a different country, you should at least make an effort and like just not assume that people should speak to you in something when you're going to their country. And learning like Welsh that I'm learning, obviously not a lot of people speak it, but when you go to like these tiny little villages in North Wales, like where I went, it was like a whole other set of people that you could communicate with. And whereas if you didn't know the language, you might not. And it helps out. Like, I feel like you should at least make an effort when you're going to speak to someone in their own like language, and it just helps out everyone. Like, it's a nice thing to do, and maybe now I can speak to a few more people in the world that I might not have been able to a few years ago when I didn't know anything at all. It's just communicating with other people and chatting, and just it's really interesting to be able to talk to people from different cultures and different who have different experiences.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. I think that we're going to go to the next three features in our show now. But after we do so, we're going to go straight back to Abbi to sort of wrap up what we've really learned from this discussion, and where Abby's going next, looking ahead to the future of her journey with the languages as well. And you know, but before we move to the next two features, you know, if you're learning English and you've stumbled across this podcast, you know, you're doing a great job. Well, I don't really care what stage you're at. You're smashing it. Like the people I spoke to on my Xbox all those nights ago, where, you know, it's a tough challenge learning a new language, and it immensely impresses me whenever anyone shows that they are making that effort. And I believe I should make more of an effort. And when I see it in others, it really inspires me. So, Abby, doing the research for this, and then actually the chat itself, it just makes me want to go back to it more and more and more. But we're going to go back to Abby to conclude the episode, but also go through her next steps with poetry. Not poetry, that's the next feature. With her next steps with languages. The feature we've got coming up next is poetry. So we have Emma Cusson, a poet based in the Thanet area. She shares a weekly diary story poem from her personal collection. And here is the poem that Emma would love to share with you all this week.
Have you ever met the human embodiment of a cold glass of water on a hot summer's day? So refreshing. No second guessing. Have you ever wanted to fall into someone, not because their arms are wide open ready to catch you, but because you knew their embrace was worth the chase? My naturally messy hair would always find ways of leaving parts of me on you. It would lay dormant and come night tangle and curl around your heart. You're mistaking it for butterflies when you see me, and compromise what you couldn't foresee. I always know I've shown him magic when I catch him smiling. Interrupt his smile, caressing is this season's style. No, don't distract. You're driving, you're guiding, through the softest parts of September, make him remember, then dismember the parts of you that were an offering. What you see in me I am led to believe is just another trick up your sleeve. But I disbelieve what I believe, for I misconceive you give me a reason to breathe when I thought you was asking me to leave.
Thank you for that, Emma, and we'll tune in with Emma once again next week for her next poem. Do let us know in the comments, again, what you think of Emma's poems. Really lovely to have them here on the My Generation podcast every single Thursday. Next, we're moving to Joe Finnegan, who brings us a weekly video game review. Joe covers games from all variety of platforms, console, PC, portable devices, Nintendo Wii, why not, anything. And Joe is a gamer himself, a streamer as well at That's So Joe on Twitch. You can follow him over there if you want to see some of Joe's streams as well. Maybe recommend him a game and say hi if you've come from the My Generation podcast. And here is the game that Joe would love to recommend for you all this week.
Hi all. This week I wanted to talk about easily one of my favourite games of this generation, which is called Hollow Knight. It's hard to explain why I love this game so much. It's a side-scrolling game in which you use your nail to fight enemies, and this has other uses as well, where you can deflect off of objects and even certain enemies, and this is where the platforming elements come into the game. You fight a wide range of bosses, all with their own little gimmicks. You might have one guy slam into the ground from the ceiling, which you have to avoid, and another might use ranged magical attacks, for instance. You pick up new skills such as double jumping and charge dashing as the game goes on, and this opens up the map, allowing you to revisit hidden areas that weren't accessible previously. The story is a little bit out there, and if I'm honest, I kind of glanced over it in my playthrough, but the presentation and atmosphere of the game is so good and kept me interested in it throughout. Hollow Knight's currently available on all consoles, and I really recommend you check this game out. Back over to Max.
Thank you for that, Joe. And we'll tune in with Joe once again next week to find out what his next video game review is. Thank you, Joe. And now, before we go back to Abby, we're going to have Tom Axtell and his pirate facts and profiles. Well, Tom, on the 1 year anniversary of the My Generation podcast, we found out that Tom was a little bit of a pirate fanatic, and we knew that we had to bring him into the show to talk about it every week. And he brings us a story of a pirate of old, or a fact, or a set of tales, each and every week here to the show. And here is the pirate that Tom would love to talk about this week.
Hello and welcome to Tom's Prolific Pirate Profiles. Today we are talking about Thomas II. Thomas II arrived in Bermuda in 1692. Without much information about his youth, II probably had a wealthy family in Rhode Island. He served as a privateer on English ships and was soon made the captain of a ship called the Amity Venture. With permission from the governor of Bermuda, Thomas received permission to attack French ships and colonies along the African coast. Alongside Captain George Drew, he was meant to join the Royal Africa Company. However, after a storm damaged Drew's ship, II decided to turn to piracy. It was easy enough to persuade his crew, as the original plan didn't pay well and was also extremely risky. With a course set for the Red Sea, II encountered a great Indian ship, which contained over 300 soldiers. II and his crew decided to attack, and after only a short battle, II emerged victorious, and each crew member received a share of over £3,000. Discovering from those captured that the ship was part of a convoy, Tew wanted to attack further. Most of the crew disagreed, and so they sailed from Madagascar. Soon after this, Tew travelled back to Rhode Island and managed to obtain a pardon. After a while though, he grew bored and thought that the call to the sea was too great to resist, and he took command of a new ship and sailed towards the Red Sea. In 1695, Tew attacked a ship belonging to the Great Mogul. This was not as successful as the last battle, with Tew being mortally wounded by cannon fire. Tew was disemboweled by a cannonball. Many of Tew's men were immediately executed, and the rest died in prison in India. Tew's career as a pirate was short, but successful. He became known as one of the richest pirates in history. And that was the story of Thomas Tew.
And thank you for that, Tom. We'll tune in with Tom once again next week to find out what the next pirate he'd love to tell us all about. If there's a pirate story of old you want Tom to talk about, please let us know. Tom's always down for doing a bit more history digging. In the way that Abby is with languages, Tom will be doing it with pirates, so don't you worry. Now, we're going to be heading back over in just a moment to Abby to speak with her about closing the show on what she's learned and where she's going next with not poetry. I've said it again. I've said poetry again. It's not poetry. That's Emma. I'm stealing Emma's feature. No, languages. But there are future topics we'd still love to speak with people about here on the My Generation podcast. I want to speak with more members of film crews. Maybe you work behind the scenes on film sets. Maybe you're not one of the sort of glamorous roles that gets all the attention and the screen time. Maybe you work behind the scenes. You're a gaffer. You are a runner, a location scout, anything. We want to speak to really niche film roles. So get in touch with the Facebook page at the My Generation podcast or comment wherever you are listening. Now, Abby, I'd love to know next for you. You've started learning. You're now making the steps to really take strides with the Welsh language. What would you say is next for you in terms of your learning and your journey?
Well, I feel like I've still got a long way to go. I would love to be able to get to a sort of level of fluency. Obviously that will take ages, but me and my family do take trips to Wales, and we would love to go more often. We've found out that we've got family that live around there and visit where my dad grew up, so maybe possibly spending like a little bit of time there to actually get to know the people and learn the languages. I do love it. I love going on like road trips. We did one around Yorkshire not that long ago, and the scenery was amazing, and I would say it's almost more amazing in Wales. Like some of the places we went were those like secret waterfalls and stuff. So I do love the country, and maybe just spend some time there and actually get to know the people and continue my research, because I love researching topics, and I think it would really help with the fluency, because obviously there's being taught it, but there's like the language you're taught isn't the way that everyday people speak. And I've learned out that actually apparently a lot of the words that you're taught are like kind of the formal way, and not like you were saying, like the slang and the stuff. And I think that would be really cool to learn.
Yeah, because I imagine there's a whole sort of casual side to every language. I imagine most of what I can speak in regards to French is really formalized, and if you got down onto the boots of the ground of France and tried to use this stuff, you would come across as very, very much someone who does not speak this as a third language, which makes sense. It's you start off with the formalities, and then you gradually get into the groove of the what makes the language unique. Because when I hear people who are learning English speak with me, a lot of my friends are overseas, moving over and learning the language for the first time, and fairly new, that you start off with those really formal words, and then you sort of realize all the quips and all the little nuances and the ways we play on our own language, because English is such a messy language, right? We bend it in so many ways.
I remember when I was younger, I think it was around primary school age, we had a teacher who taught us French. She lived in France for a bit, and she taught us French, and she taught us this phrase, and when I was about 11 I thought it was hilarious. It it wasn't, it was like shut your mouth in French or something, but she taught us it as fermer la bouche. But apparently years later, my friend Rania, she is from Morocco, but a French speaking place in Morocco, and I asked her, I was like, is this right? And she was like, oh my god, and started laughing at me, because apparently it's like the Shakespearean version of French, like French, like a really like old, like old English, but like that in France. And she was like, why are you speaking like that? So I'd gone around for ages when I was little saying that, thinking it was really funny, but I was actually speaking in like really old French speak. So it'd be really cool to like learn like the nowadays version of Welsh, just in case I'm getting really formal words.
Interesting. That's awesome, because that just opens up the fact that every language is like English. It has its really formal version, but it also has its old, outdated version. I didn't even know that.
Apparently it was like, round near like revolution time, like that's speak in France, like so I've been taught this and thought, I was like, oh, I'm really cool, I know like this slang version of French, but not unless I was like I don't know, like really really old.
Oh, that's incredible. Oh, I love that. Well, I mean, Abby, that is a very interesting note to start to wrap the show up on, because it just opens the can of worms as to how many possibilities there are with all of these languages to go backwards. Like, even once you've learned a language, that doesn't have to be the end. You have generations worth of how that language is used to go through, which just adds so much more. It makes the topic of languages feel as deep as the ocean now.
This is why I want to do my research. It's so cool.
Yeah, and I'd love to know in the comments, if you're learning a language, what are you learning? Why are you learning it as well? Because it's always interesting as to why specific people learn a specific language, because it could be for, a work commitment, whether you just think it sounds nice, a family member, a partner. There are thousands of reasons to need to learn a language. And, one great platform I've seen for it is Toastmasters, which is a public speaking place, and it's international. You can do it all across the world. There's probably a Toastmasters club near you if you live somewhere. So it's great. Toastmasters is great. There's I don't know every country that it covers, but it's very international. And what's great about it is that you have people coming in who are doing it to learn a language for the first time. I'm based in the southeast of England, and the person who runs my local club, the one that I've been, visiting on and off now for about 3 years, she is Polish, I believe. And when she first joined the club, she could barely, her grasp on the English language was barely there. And I came back after a long break to an online one that they were doing on Zoom. And, she's gonna be the top person there. And the last time I saw her on a physical in-person meeting, her English was so clear, so crisp, everything down to a T, confidence. It was great to see, and you just love to see it. So please let us know below what you're doing with languages. And Abby, my final question to you is, what do you think you've learned by talking about your journey of learning a new language here on today's show?
Well, I feel like you've obviously opened my eyes to a lot more, like you were saying about the slang and stuff, but I just feel like it's just a really nice experience to share the history and like have someone else to talk to about this stuff, because obviously I love learning about this, and it's just so cool that you're really interested in this as well.
Well, yeah, and I don't think it's just us. I think it's so many people. It's like, I'm a film student. I love watching films that have different languages. And whilst I don't think I think I'm going to struggle to get to fluency with some languages, that doesn't mean I won't stop learning, and doesn't mean I won't stop watching films in their native tongues from all across the world. But yeah, no, thank you, Abby. That is fascinating. And I think we're going to probably have to get Abby back on the show later down the line on her journey to see where she's at, and keep you constantly updated.
Definitely.
If you are interested in following along with Abby's story. Now, because we pre-record these episodes of the podcast a wee bit in advance, this, in terms of future episodes and what's coming next, we're nearly at Christmas. And that's scary to me because we've blinked and March turns to September and September goes to December. You know, it's crazy. We're recording this in the middle of September at the moment, but you're going to be hearing this at the start of December, which is crazy to me. So we've got some really cool stuff planned for another Christmas special coming out on Christmas Eve this time. If you're in the festive spirit, you can go back to last year's ridiculous on-camera Christmas special with the old podcast setup. You know, it was such a fun one. That was filmed by Alex Durham, freelance, great videographer. Me and Dan having probably one of the weirdest chats ever. You know Dan Inwood, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dan's lovely.
He's a lovely man, and we had a very interesting chat on last year's Christmas special. So if you know, I hope wherever you are in the world, it's a safe and well place for you right now, as we're recording this far enough ahead to have absolutely no idea what the world will look like come Christmas this year. But I hope you're able to stay festive and have a good time wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and however you celebrate as well. But thank you so much for coming on the show, Abbi.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Like, it's been a lovely time, and it's really nice to talk about something that I'm trying to do. So yeah, thank you.
That's grand. Really lovely to have you on, and we're definitely having Abbi back on the show. And that concludes this week's episode of the My Generation podcast. When I turn off this recording, I'm going to very much hope that it's actually recorded, because like I said at the start, we're using a new setup this week. So who knows whether this episode will even air, whether the words I'm uttering right now will even come to fruition, but we hope, and we move on. But no, thank you, Abbi. That was really great. Looking forward to talking languages a hell of a lot more here on the My Generation podcast. We have got the Christmas special coming up. We've got future chats with some of our returning guests. Emma Cousins going to be back on for a full episode very, very soon, talking about some of her pre-lockdown of what must feel like a lifetime ago for you now listening to this travel stories as well. Thank you all so much for listening along with us today. And it is a goodbye from Abbi.
Yeah, goodbye, everyone.
And it's a goodbye from me. Thank you all so much for listening, everyone. And we'll tune in with you all next week, next Thursday at 6 p.m. for the next episode of the My Generation podcast.